The engines of Flight 402 were already spooling up on the JFK tarmac when the pilot killed the power. Silence fell over the cabin. But in first class, a war had just begun. Richard Sterling, a man worth billions, thought he could humiliate a quiet 17-year-old boy named Elijah. Just for sitting in the same row, he threw a glass of ice water in the boy's face, laughing as it dripped down his hoodie. But Sterling didn't know two things: first, who Elijah actually was, and second, that the FBI was listening to every word from the control tower. When the doors didn't open and the fasten seatbelt sign turned red, Sterling realized too late the trap wasn't for the boy. It was for him. The air inside the first-class cabin of British Airways Flight 402 smelled of expensive leather and conditioned oxygen. It was the specific scent of exclusivity that Richard Sterling felt was his birthright. At 52, Sterling was the CEO of Vantage Holdings, a private equity firm that had recently been featured in the Wall Street Journal for its aggressive acquisition of pharmaceutical patents. He was a man who wore his net worth like armor, specifically a bespoke Savile Row suit that cost more than most people's cars. He sat in seat 1A, swirling a scotch that the flight attendant, a patient woman named Sarah, had brought him before takeoff. He was already irritated. The Wi-Fi wasn't connecting fast enough, and he had a merger to finalize before they landed in London. "Sarah," he snapped, not looking up from his tablet. "Why is the signal dragging? I'm paying $20,000 for this seat. I expect the internet to work faster than a dial-up connection in the 90s. "I apologize, Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, her voice practiced and calm. "We are currently taxiing. The high-speed connection will stabilize once we reach 10,000 feet. Sterling grunted, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. He took a sip of his scotch, his eyes scanning the cabin. It was mostly empty, which he preferred. But then the movement caught his eye. Walking down the aisle was a teenager. He looked to be about 17, black, wearing a slightly oversized grey hoodie, faded jeans, and scuffed sneakers. He had a pair of vintage over-ear headphones around his neck and was carrying a battered black backpack. He looked at the seat numbers paused at row 2 and then settled into seat 2A, directly behind Sterling. Sterling stiffened. He turned around, peering over the headrest. "Excuse me," Sterling said, his voice dripping with faux politeness. "Son, I think you're lost. Economy is back that way. Go past the curtain." The boy, Elijah, looked up. He had soft, intelligent eyes and a demeanor that was surprisingly calm for someone being addressed so aggressively. "I'm in seat 2A, sir," Elijah said quietly. He pulled his boarding pass from his pocket and held it up briefly. "Just getting settled." Sterling stared at the pass, then at the boy's clothes. It didn't compute. In Sterling's world, hoodies didn't fly. First class unless you were a rapper or an athlete, and this kid looked like neither. He looked like a student. "Upgrade," Sterling scoffed, turning back around, but speaking loud enough for the cabin to hear. "They really are letting anyone in here these days. It ruins the ambiance." Elijah didn't respond. He simply placed his backpack under the seat in front of him, took out a notebook and a pen, and put his headphones on. The plane began its slow roll toward the runway. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a short wait due to air traffic control. Sterling huffed, slamming his tablet onto the tray table. The delay was the final straw. He needed to vent, and the target was sitting right behind him. He stood up ostensibly to open the overhead bin, but really to glare at Elijah. The boy was writing in his notebook, head bobbing slightly to music Sterling couldn't hear. "Hey," Sterling barked. Elijah didn't hear him. Sterling reached out and tapped hard on the boy's shoulder. Elijah flinched, pulling his headphones down. "Yes." "Turn that noise down." Sterling lied. "I can hear it through the seat. It's distracting." I haven't even turned the music on yet, sir," Elijah said, confused. "I'm just wearing them to cancel the engine noise." "Don't lie to me," Sterling sneered. "I know your type. You think because you scraped together enough miles or got a lucky upgrade, you can act like you own the place. You don't belong here." Elijah's expression hardened slightly. He wasn't scared, Sterling noted with annoyance. He was disappointed. "I paid for my ticket, sir. Please leave me alone." "You paid." Sterling laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He looked around for an audience, but the other passengers were studiously ignoring them. He grabbed his glass of water, untouched, filled with ice from his console. "You need to cool off, kid. You're getting a little hot-headed talking to your betters like that." In a motion that was shocking in its casual cruelty, Richard Sterling flicked his wrist. The ice water arc across the short distance, splashing directly into Elijah's face and soaking the front of his grey hoodie. The gasp from Sarah, the flight attendant, standing a few rows back, was audible. Elijah sat frozen water dripping from his eyelashes, the ice cubes idling down his chest. He didn't jump up. He didn't scream. He just wiped his eyes slowly. "There," Sterling said, sitting back down and adjusting his cuffs. "Now you know your place. Sit there and be wet, or go back to coach and dry off." Sterling picked up his scotch, feeling a rush of adrenaline. He felt powerful. He had asserted dominance. He had no idea that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. For 3 seconds, the first-class cabin was dead silent. Then Sarah rushed forward, grabbing a linen napkin. "Oh my God," she whispered, reaching toward Elijah. "Sir, are you okay? I am so sorry." Elijah took the napkin, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a suppressed rage he was trying desperately to control. "I'm fine," he said, his voice steady but low. "Thank you." "I'm going to get the purser," Sarah said, glaring at the back of Sterling's head. "This is assault." Sterling heard the word and spun around. "Assault. Don't be ridiculous. It's water. It'll dry. If he didn't want to get wet, he shouldn't have been disrespectful." "He said nothing to you, Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, her professional mask slipping. "I saw the whole thing. Then you saw a delinquent provoking a titanium status member," Sterling shot back. "And if you report this, I'll have your job. I know the VP of operations at this airline personally. Do you want to be serving peanuts in economy for the rest of your career, or do you want to bring me another scotch?" Sarah stood her ground, her face pale. "I'm reporting this to Captain Miller immediately." She turned and walked briskly toward the cockpit. Elijah was dabbing his hoodie. He looked at Sterling, who was now smirking at him. "You think the captain cares about you?" Sterling taunted. "I'm the reason this bird flies. My company ships millions in freight with this airline every year. You're a rounding error." Elijah finally spoke, his voice clear. "My name is Elijah Vance, and I think you should worry less about the airline and more about why we aren't moving." Sterling frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Look out the window," Elijah said. Sterling looked. The plane had stopped moving completely. They were on a taxiway far from the terminal, but not yet at the runway. The engines, usually a high-pitched whine, were winding down. Inside the cockpit, Captain James Miller listened to Sarah's account, his jaw tight. He was a veteran pilot, former Air Force, and he had zero tolerance for unruly passengers, regardless of their bank account. "He threw water on a kid," Miller clarified. "Yes, Captain, and he threatened my job. The boy, The boy is surprisingly calm, but Sterling is out of control. I don't feel safe with him in the cabin once we're in the air. Copy that, Miller said. He picked up the radio. Tower, this is BA 402. We have a passenger incident in the first-class cabin. Requesting permission to return to the gate to offload a passenger. There was a pause on the radio, a long pause. When the voice from the tower came back, it wasn't the usual air traffic controller. It was a deeper, more authoritative voice. BA 402, this is Tower. Negative on return to gate. Hold your position on taxiway Charlie. Do not, I repeat, do not return to the gate. Captain Miller furrowed his brow. Tower, we have an aggressive passenger. Protocol is to offload. BA 402, hold position. Shut down engines immediately. You have a containment situation. Authorities are en route to your aircraft now. Do not open the main cabin doors until instructed. Is the subject Richard Sterling in seat 1A? Miller exchanged a look with his co-pilot. How did they know the seat number? He hadn't mentioned it. Affirmative, Tower. Subject is Sterling 1A. Roger, keep him seated. FBI is 2 minutes out. Seal the plane. Miller clicked off the radio. FBI, he muttered. He turned to Sarah. Go back out there. Don't tell Sterling we're waiting for the police. Just tell him it's a mechanical issue. I don't want him panicking and doing something stupid before the feds get here. Sarah nodded and went back into the cabin. Sterling was tapping his watch. Why have we stopped, Sarah? What is going on? Mechanical check, Mr. Sterling. She lied smoothly. The captain noticed a warning light. We just need to run a diagnostic. Unbelievable, Sterling groaned. This is the incompetence I was talking about. He pulled out his phone to make a call, but then frowned. No signal. We're on the ground. Why is there no signal? Elijah, now drying his headphones, looked at Sterling with a strange intensity. Maybe they jammed it, the boy said softly. Jammed it. You watch too many movies, kid. Suddenly the plane shuddered, not from the engines, but from the weight of a stair car slamming against the fuselage door. Outside, blue and red lights reflected off the wet tarmac, dancing across the interior walls of the first-class cabin. Sterling looked out the window. His face went white. It wasn't a maintenance truck. 3 black SUVs and 2 airport police cruisers had surrounded the plane. Men in windbreakers with bold yellow letters on the back were swarming the stairs. What the hell? Sterling stood up. Is there a bomb? The cabin door lock disengaged with a loud thunk. The door swung open. The cool, damp air of New York rushed in, followed instantly by 4 agents. They weren't smiling. The lead agent, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a badge hanging from her neck, stepped into the first-class cabin. She scanned the room, ignoring Sarah, ignoring the other passengers. Her eyes locked onto seat 1A. Richard Sterling, she asked. Sterling puffed up his chest. Yes. Finally someone in charge. I want to report this crew for incompetence and this kid for harassment. I have a meeting in London. Richard Sterling, the agent interrupted, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. I'm Special Agent Harrow, FBI Financial Crimes Division. You are under arrest. Sterling blinked. Arrest for what? Throwing water. Are you insane? I'll have your badge. I'll sue the department. Agent Harrow stepped closer, producing a pair of handcuffs. This isn't about the water, Mr. Sterling, though adding assault to the list won't help you. This is about the Ponzi scheme you've been running through Vantage Holdings. We know about the Cayman accounts. We know about the wire fraud. And we know you were flying to London, not for a merger, but to a non-extradition country, via a connecting flight. The silence in the cabin was absolute. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Sterling's arrogance evaporated, replaced by the primal fear of a trapped animal. He looked at the door, then at the agents, and finally his eyes landed on Elijah. Elijah was looking at the agent. "Agent Harrow," Elijah said calmly. Agent Harrow nodded at the teenager. "Good work, Elijah. You okay?" Sterling's head snapped back to the boy. You know him?" Elijah stood up, holding his damp hoodie. "I'm not just a student, Richard," Elijah said, his voice dropping the polite facade. "I'm the intern who cracked your encrypted ledger 3 days ago. They put me on this flight to make sure you didn't switch planes at the last second." The twist hit Sterling like a physical blow. The delinquent he had abused wasn't a random passenger. He was the architect of his destruction. The handcuffs clicked tight around Richard Sterling's wrists, the metallic sound echoing in the stunned silence of the first-class cabin. To anyone watching it, looked like the end. The villain had been caught, the hero revealed. But men like Richard Sterling didn't get to be billionaires by folding the moment the cards went against them. As Agent Harrow pulled him up from his seat, Sterling didn't struggle. He didn't scream. Instead, a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He looked at his Patek Philippe watch, then at Elijah, then at Harrow. 1:45 p.m. Sterling said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You made a mistake, Agent Harrow. A very expensive mistake." Harrow shoved him slightly toward the aisle. "Save it for the interrogation room, Richard. You have the right to remain silent." "I wouldn't take me off this plane if I were you," Sterling said, planting his feet. He was surprisingly strong. "In fact, I wouldn't disconnect my laptop from the plane's Wi-Fi if you want the pension funds of the Fire Department of New York to exist in 20 minutes. Harrow paused. She signaled her team to hold. "What are you talking about?" Sterling leaned back against the bulkhead, the handcuffs glinting. "It's called a dead man's switch. You know I'm a cautious man. My servers conduct a handshake with my personal device every 30 minutes. If I don't authenticate specifically, if I don't enter a biometric key that only I possess, the system assumes I've been compromised." He looked at Elijah with a sneer. "Your little intern here might have cracked the ledger to see the money, but he doesn't control it. If that handshake fails, the algorithm triggers. $4 billion in assets hidden in cryptocurrency and offshore shell companies will be instantly scattered through a tumbler. It will be deleted, rewritten, and lost in the blockchain ether. Gone. Forever." Sterling chuckled darkly. "So you can arrest me. But you'll be the agent who lost the life savings of 40,000 first responders. How will that look on your performance review?" The atmosphere in the cabin shifted from triumph to dread. Captain Miller, standing by the cockpit door, looked pale. "Agent Harrow, is that possible?" Harrow looked at Elijah. The boy was standing quietly, clutching his water-stained hoodie. "Elijah, is he bluffing?" Elijah looked at Sterling, studying him. The boy's mind was racing. He had spent 3 months inside Sterling's digital architecture. He knew the code better than he knew the streets of his own neighborhood in Queens. "He's not bluffing about the mechanism," Elijah said slowly. "I saw a subroutine I couldn't access. It was labeled Cerberus. I thought it was a firewall, but it's a kill switch." "Exactly," Sterling gloated. "And you have..." He checked his watch again. 19 minutes before the next handshake. "So Agent Harrow here is the deal. You uncuff me. You walk off this plane. You let us take off for London. Once I land, I'll stabilize the funds. If you don't, the money burns." Harrow's jaw tightened. She was trapped. If she let him go, he'd flee justice. If she held him, the victims lost everything. It was a perfect checkmate. "We can't let him leave," Harrow whispered to her partner. "But we can't lose that money." "I can stop it," Elijah said. Everyone turned to the teenager. Sterling laughed, a loud barking sound that grated on everyone's nerves. You're a child. You got lucky finding a back door I left open. Cerberus is military-grade encryption. It adapts. You touch it, it speeds up the timer. Go ahead, boy. Try it. Ruin everyone's lives." Elijah walked past Sterling, ignoring the taunt. He sat down in Sterling's seat 1A. The leather was still warm. He opened his battered backpack and pulled out a laptop that looked like it was held together with duct tape and stickers. It was a stark contrast to Sterling's sleek titanium devices. "I need a direct line to the plane's server," Elijah told the captain. "And I need everyone to be quiet." "You're making a mistake," Sterling shouted, his composure cracking slightly. "Agent, tell him to stop. He's going to trigger it." "Sit him down," Harrow ordered her agents. They pushed Sterling into seat 2A, the very seat Elijah had occupied. The roles were physically reversed. The billionaire was now the prisoner in the second row, watching the kid in the first row decide his fate. 19 minutes, Elijah, Harrow said, standing over him. "Can you do it?" Elijah cracked his knuckles. "I wrote the counter-script last night. I just didn't think I'd have to use it at 30,000 feet. Or, well, on the ground." He began to type. The first-class cabin had transformed into a mobile cyber warfare unit. The other passengers had been escorted off the plane, but Sterling, Elijah, the FBI agents, and the flight crew remained. The air conditioning hummed loudly, masking the frantic clicking of Elijah's keyboard. Sterling, handcuffed in seat 2A, was sweating. He leaned forward, trying to see the screen. "You're looking at the wrong directory," Sterling spat. "You're going through the front door. Cerberus will eat you alive." "I'm not going through the front door," Elijah murmured, his eyes darting across lines of cascading green code. "I'm going through the cooling vents." "What?" Sterling scoffed. "There are no cooling vents in code, you idiot." "There are in yours," Elijah replied, not looking back. "You're arrogant, Richard. You built the system to keep people out, but you left a vanity signature in the source code. Every 1,000 lines, the code spells out your initials, RS. It creates a rhythmic redundancy, a pattern." Sterling stiffened. He hadn't told anyone about that. It was his signature, his way of branding the theft. "I'm using your own ego against you," Elijah continued, his fingers flying. "I'm riding the pattern of your initials straight to the kernel." 10 minutes, Agent Harrow called out, checking her watch. "Status." "I'm in the outer shell," Elijah said. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "But he's right about one thing. It's adaptive. The code is shifting every few seconds. It's like trying to catch a fish with your bare hands in muddy water." "Give up!" Sterling yelled. "Uncuff me, I'll enter the code. We can make a deal, Harrow." "I'll give you names. I'll give you the politicians I bribed. Just don't let the money burn." Harrow hesitated. The pressure was immense. If Elijah failed, she was responsible for a catastrophe. She looked at the boy. He looked so young, wearing that damp hoodie, the water stain from Sterling's assault still visible on the grey fabric. "Why are you doing this, kid?" Sterling sneered, trying to break Elijah's concentration. "What do you care about the money? You're on an intern stipend. You think the FBI is going to give you a medal? They're using you, just like I used you. You're disposable to them." Elijah stopped typing for a fraction of a second. "You didn't use me," Elijah said, his voice dropping an octave. I applied to Vantage Holdings specifically to find you." "What?" Sterling blinked. "My mother," Elijah said, resuming his typing faster this time. "Sheila Vance. Does the name ring a bell?" Sterling frowned. "I deal with thousands of clients. I don't remember every secretary or teacher who invests with us." "She wasn't a client," Elijah said tighty. "She was a janitor at your headquarters in Chicago. She worked nights. She saved every dollar for 10 years to put into your guaranteed growth fund because she wanted to send me to MIT. You liquidated her pension 3 years ago. She had a stroke from the stress 2 months later. She's in a care home now. I can't pay for her meds." The revelation hung heavy in the air. Sarah, the flight attendant, covered her mouth. Harrow stared at the boy with new respect. This wasn't just a job. It was vengeance. "So," Elijah said, hitting the enter key with force, "I didn't come for a job. I came for the receipt." 5 minutes, Harrow warned. "It's fighting back." Elijah grunted. "The system detected the intrusion. It's initiating the wipe early." "No!" Sterling screamed, struggling against the cuffs. "You fool, you've killed it. It's deleting." On Elijah's screen, a red bar began to load. Deletion sequence initiated. 5%, 10%. "I can't stop it," Elijah yelled. "It's isolated the drive. Uncuff me," Sterling roared. "I can override it if I do it now." "Last chance, Harrow." Harrow reached for her keys. She couldn't risk it. "Elijah, stand down. I have to let him do it." "No," Elijah shouted. "Don't touch him. I'm not trying to stop the deletion." "What?" Harrow froze. "I'm not stopping it," Elijah said, his eyes wide. "I'm redirecting it." "Redirecting it where?" "The deletion command requires a target," Elijah said, his voice trembling with adrenaline. "It targets the financial ledgers. I'm changing the target directory." "To what?" Sterling asked, his face draining of color. Elijah slammed his finger onto the final key. "To your personal cloud backup, the one holding your blackmail files, the one with the evidence of every illegal deal you've ever done." The red bar on the screen raced to 100%. Deletion complete. Silence. Sterling slumped in his seat. My files." "The money is safe," Elijah said, exhaling a long, shaky breath. "I isolated the financial assets in a sandbox, but Cerberus had to eat something, so I fed it your insurance policy. All the blackmail you had on judges, senators, and partners, it's gone. You have no leverage left. No one is coming to save you because you can't threaten them anymore." Sterling stared at the back of seat 1A. The boy hadn't just saved the money. He had stripped Sterling of his armor. Harrow stepped forward, a grim smile on her face. "Well, Richard, looks like you're just a regular criminal now." But the drama wasn't over. As the adrenaline faded, another reality began to set in. The plane was still surrounded, but inside the cabin, the social dynamics were about to shift again. The technical victory was won, but the legal war was just beginning. Within 30 minutes, a legal team arrived. Not public defenders, but the Wolf of Wall Street types. Sterling's primary attorney, a man named Mason Thorne, swept into the first-class cabin like he owned the airline. He was followed by 2 junior associates carrying briefcases. "Unshackle my client immediately," Thorne barked at Agent Harrow. "You have no warrant for this aircraft, and you have detained a private citizen on hearsay." "We have a confession," Harrow said, standing her ground. "You have a confession obtained under duress during a high-stress hostage situation created by your incompetence," Thorne countered smoothly. "Any judge will throw out what he said in the last hour. And as for this child," he pointed a manicured finger at Elijah, "we will be suing him for corporate espionage violation of the CFAA and theft of intellectual property. By the time we're done, he'll be in prison until he's 40. Sterling, sensing the tide turning back in his favor, straightened up. "That's right. He hacked my system. That's a federal crime. Arrest him, Agent Harrow. Or are you biased?" Elijah looked at Harrow. He knew they were right. Technically, what he did was illegal, even if it was for the right reasons. The law was a tricky thing, and men like Sterling knew how to bend it. "He saved $4 billion, Harrow argued. "He accessed a private server without authorization," Thorne said. "That is the definition of hacking. Arrest him, or I call the Attorney General right now." Harrow looked conflicted. She hated this part of the job. The bad guys had better lawyers. "Wait." A voice came from the galley. It was Sarah, the flight attendant. She had been quiet during the hacking, handing out water and keeping the crew calm. Now she stepped forward, holding her personal smartphone. "You can talk about hacking?" Sarah said, her voice shaking but determined. "But what about assault?" Thorne laughed. "Assault? Did my client touch anyone? Did he throw a punch?" "He threw this," Sarah said. She tapped her screen and turned the phone around. On the screen was a video. It was shaky at first, but then it stabilized. It showed the interaction from part 1 perfectly. The angle was from the galley looking through the curtain. It showed Sterling standing over Elijah. It captured the audio clearly. "You need to cool off, kid. You're getting a little hot-headed talking to your betters like that." It showed the water splashing into Elijah's face. It showed the humiliation. But more importantly, it showed Elijah's reaction, passive calm, respectful. "So," Thorne dismissed it. "He got wet. We'll pay for the dry cleaning. That's a tort, not a felony. It's hardly relevant to a financial investigation." "It's relevant," Sarah said, "because I live-streamed it." Sterling's eyes bulged. "You what?" "I was on a video call with my daughter before we pushed back. Sarah lied, or maybe she didn't. I didn't realize it was still recording to my cloud. But when you started yelling, I hit upload. I have a cousin who runs a blog called The Daily Justice. He shared it 20 minutes ago." She tapped the screen again to show the view count. 4.5 million views. The comments were scrolling so fast they were a blur. "Who is this guy?" "That's Richard Sterling, CEO of Vantage." "Look at how he treats that kid." "Cancel Vantage Holdings. I'm pulling my money out now." Thorne's face went pale. He pulled out his own phone. "Mr. Sterling, check the stock price." Sterling fumbled for his phone with his cuffed hands. Harrow held it up for him. Vantage Holdings was in free fall. The stock had tanked 18% in 10 minutes. Trading had been halted by the SEC due to volatility. "The board of directors is calling," Thorne whispered, looking at his buzzing phone. They're voting to remove you, Richard, effective immediately. They can't have this PR nightmare attached to the firm during a federal investigation." "They can't fire me," Sterling shrieked. "I own the majority shares." "Not anymore," Elijah said softly. "Remember the dead man switch? You said the assets were in shell companies. When I redirected the deletion to your blackmail files, I also exposed the ownership structure of those shell companies to the public ledger. The SEC can see that you've been embezzling from your own company. That triggers the bad actor clause in your CEO contract. You're fired automatically." Sterling looked at Elijah with pure horror. It wasn't the police that defeated him. It wasn't the handcuffs. It was the combination of his own arrogance, the water throwing, and the boy's intellect. The water had made him a villain to the public. The hack had made him a liability to his partners. He was completely alone. "Agent Harrow," Thorne said, stepping away from Sterling and closing his briefcase. "It appears I have a conflict of interest. I represent Vantage Holdings, not Mr. Sterling personally. Since he is no longer an officer of the company, I cannot represent him." Thorne looked at Sterling with cold indifference. "Good luck, Richard. You'll need a public defender." The lawyer turned and walked off the plane. Sterling slumped against the window, defeated. The fight had left him. "Get him out of here," Harrow ordered, "and someone get Elijah a dry hoodie. He's got a statement to give." But as they led Sterling away, he stopped at row 2. He looked at Elijah one last time. "You're a genius, kid," Sterling muttered. "I should have hired you instead of insulting you." Elijah looked up, his eyes weary but clear. "You couldn't have hired me, Richard. You can't buy integrity." Sterling was dragged down the jet bridge. The flashing lights of the police cars reflecting in his eyes, a stark contrast to the flash bulbs of the paparazzi that awaited him, not as a celebrity, but as a pariah. However, just as the cabin quieted down, Elijah's laptop beeped. A single black terminal window popped up. It wasn't code. It was a chat message. Sender unknown. Message: "You passed the test, Elijah. But Sterling was just the middleman. Now let's talk about the real money." Elijah stared at the screen. The nightmare wasn't over. It had just leveled up. The message on the screen pulsed like a heartbeat. "You passed the test." Elijah stared at the pixelated text, the adrenaline in his veins turning into ice. He had thought the battle was between him and Richard Sterling, a personal vendetta for his mother, a fight against a bully in a first-class seat. But this message suggested that Sterling was merely a gatekeeper, a pawn in a much larger, darker game. "Elijah!" Agent Harrow's voice broke his trance. She was standing over him, her face flushed with the victory of the arrest. "We need to get you off the plane. We have a secure debriefing room set up in Terminal 7. You're the star witness." Elijah hesitated. If he showed her the message, he would be pulled deeper into the federal machinery. He would become an asset, a tool for the government. If he hid it, he was playing a dangerous game alone. He looked at the empty seat, 1A, where the water had been thrown. He remembered his mother's hands, cracked and tired from years of scrubbing floors at Vantage Holdings. She always told him, "The truth is the only thing they can't take from you." He turned the laptop toward Harrow. "Agent Harrow, look." Harrow leaned in. As she read the words, her expression shifted from relief to grim determination. She pulled out her radio. "Command, this is Harrow. We have a code black situation. Initiate protocol deep dive. The Sterling arrest triggered a response from a secondary party. I repeat, the subject was a middleman." She looked at Elijah with intense seriousness. "Do you know who sent this?" "No," Elijah said. "But the encryption signature, it's not standard. It's not criminal. It looks governmental or military." "Stay close to me," Harrow ordered. "We aren't going to the terminal. We're going to the tarmac transport." As they exited the aircraft, the scene outside was chaotic. News helicopters were circling overhead, their spotlight beams cutting through the gloomy New York afternoon. The video Sarah had uploaded was dominating the news cycle. The headline on the airport monitors flashed, "Billionaire bully arrested on tarmac, teen whistleblower, saves police pension fund." But down on the ground, the reality was grittier. Elijah was ushered into an armored SUV. Harrow sat opposite him. Sterling wasn't just running a Ponzi scheme. Harrow admitted, her voice low. We suspected Vantage Holdings was a washing machine for cartel money, the Obsidian Trust, a shadow syndicate that moves money for regimes that can't use the SWIFT system. If Sterling was their banker and you just froze their assets, then they want their money back, Elijah finished. Or, Harrow said, tapping the laptop, that message implies they aren't angry. They're impressed, which is worse. Suddenly the SUV swerved. The driver shouted, "Blockade ahead! Unmarked vehicles!" Elijah's heart hammered against his ribs. 3 black sedans had blocked the service road. Men in suits stepped out. They weren't holding guns. They were holding briefcases. Harrow reached for her weapon, but then she froze. She recognized the lead man. He was older with silver hair and a pin on his lapel that Elijah didn't recognize. "Stand down," Harrow told her driver. She turned to Elijah. "It's not the cartel, it's the NSA." The silver-haired man approached the window. He signaled for it to be rolled down. "Agent Harrow," the man said smoothly. "Excellent work securing the perimeter. We'll take custody of the digital assets and the boy from here." "He's an FBI custody director, Vance," Harrow said. Elijah's head snapped up. Vance. That was his last name. The man looked at Elijah. He had the same eyes, soft but intelligent, the same set of the jaw. "Hello, Elijah," the man said. "I believe you've been looking for answers about your father for a long time. It seems you inherited his talent for code. I'm sorry it took a splash of ice water and a federal incident for us to finally meet." The twist hit Elijah harder than the water ever could. The unknown sender wasn't a stranger. It was the grandfather he never knew he had, Director Alan Vance, head of the National Cybersecurity Division. "You knew," Elijah whispered. "You knew Sterling was robbing my mother." "Your daughter-in-law. We couldn't move on, Sterling," Alan said, his voice filled with regret. "He was too connected. We needed someone on the inside to break the encryption manually, someone Cerberus wouldn't recognize as a threat. We needed a ghost. You became that ghost." "You used me," Elijah said, anger flaring. "I watched over you," Alan corrected. "And today you didn't just save a pension fund. You exposed the entire network. But Sterling isn't done yet. He has one card left to play." "What card?" Harrow asked. "He didn't just steal money," Alan said, looking toward the police cruiser where Sterling was being held. "He stole the launch codes for the proprietary trading algorithms of the London Stock Exchange. He was going to crash the British economy the moment he landed to cover his tracks. That flight was never meant to land safely. He was going to parachute out digitally and let the plane take the blame for the crash." Elijah felt sick. The water incident, the delay, it hadn't just saved the money. It had saved the lives of everyone on Flight 402. If they had taken off, Sterling might have crashed the plane's systems to fake his death. "He's a monster," Elijah whispered. "And you caught him," Alan said. "Now let's go finish him." 3 months had passed since the tarmac of JFK became a crime scene. But for Richard Sterling, time had stopped the moment the handcuffs clicked shut. The Southern District of New York Federal Court was more than just a building. Today, it was a coliseum. The air inside the mahogany-paneled room was thick, suffocating, and electric with anticipation. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Reporters from the New York Times, CNN, and financial blogs jostled for position with former employees of Vantage Holdings people who had lost their pensions and wanted to see the wolf skinned. At the defense table, Richard Sterling sat alone. Gone was the bespoke Savile Row suit that had cost $20,000. Gone was the Patek Philippe watch. Gone was the arrogance that allowed him to look down on a teenager in seat 2A. In their place sat a man who had aged 10 years in 90 days. He wore a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. His skin pallid from months without sunlight. He was represented not by his high-powered corporate sharks who had fled the moment the assets were frozen, but by a court-appointed public defender named Mr. Gorski, a man with coffee stains on his tie and a look of resignation on his face. Elijah sat in the front row directly behind the prosecutor's bench. Beside him was his mother, Sheila. She looked different too. The exhaustion that had etched deep lines into her face during her years as a janitor was beginning to fade, replaced by a cautious hope. She held Elijah's hand so tightly her knuckles were white. "All rise!" the bailiff bellowed, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. The Honorable Judge Mason Keller swept into the room. Keller was a legend in the Southern District, a man known for his zero-tolerance policy on white-collar crime. He didn't just sentence criminals, he dismantled them. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes scanning the room before landing heavily on Sterling. "Be seated," Keller commanded. The lead prosecutor, a formidable woman named Mrs. Evelyn Gable, stood up. She didn't need notes. She had lived this case for 12 weeks. She walked to the center of the room, her heels clicking rhythmically on the floor, sounding like a ticking clock. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Gable began, her voice low, but carrying to the back of the room. "We are not here today to debate if a crime was committed. The forensic evidence provided by the FBI, corroborated by the NSA, and decrypted by the witness, Mr. Elijah Vance, is irrefutable. We have the logs. We have the wire transfers. We have the emails where Mr. Sterling referred to his investors, teachers, firefighters, nurses as cattle to be slaughtered." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Sterling flinched, staring down at the table. "But," Gable continued, turning to point directly at the defendant, "we are here to determine the character of the man who committed these crimes. The defense argues that Richard Sterling is a financial genius who made a mistake, a man who got caught up in a complex algorithm. They want you to believe this was a victimless crime of numbers." She paused, walking over to the large monitor facing the jury. "I want to show you Exhibit A one last time, because this isn't about numbers. It's about humanity." She signaled the clerk. The screen flickered to life. It was the video from Flight 402. The footage was shaky, taken from the galley by Sarah, the flight attendant. The audio, however, was crystal clear. "You need to cool off, kid. You're getting a little hot-headed talking to your betters like that." The courtroom watched in silence as the billionaire on the screen flicked his wrist. They watched the ice water arc through the air. They watched it splash across the face of the quiet boy in the grey hoodie. They saw the humiliation. But more importantly, they saw the cruelty. It wasn't an accident. It was an act of dominance. Gable froze the frame right as the water hit Elijah's face. "This," Gable said, her voice shaking with controlled anger, "is who Richard Sterling is. He didn't just steal $4 billion. He stole dignity. He looked at a young man, a boy whose mother scrubbed the floors of his own office building, and he decided that this boy was trash. He treated people like things. And when you treat people like things, it becomes very easy to steal their life savings." She turned back to the jury. "He threw water because he thought he was a god. Today I ask you to remind him that he is just a man. The people ask for the maximum sentence." Mr. Gorski, the public defender, stood up half-heartedly. His closing argument was weak, focusing on technicalities and mental stress. But he knew it was over. The jury didn't even look at him. They were looking at Elijah, who sat stoically refusing to give Sterling the satisfaction of a reaction. The jury was sent out to deliberate. In complex financial cases, deliberations can take days, sometimes weeks. They were back in 45 minutes. When the jury foreman stood up, the silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. "Have you reached a verdict?" Judge Keller asked. "We have, Your Honor," the foreman said, not looking at Sterling. "On count 1, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On count 2, money laundering, guilty. On count 3 through 42. The word guilty rang out 42 times. Each time, it felt like a physical blow to Sterling. He slumped lower and lower in his chair, his face turning a sickly shade of grey. He looked over his shoulder, desperate for an ally. But there was no one. His friends were gone. His money was gone. His reputation was incinerated. Judge Keller shuffled his papers. He took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly, letting the weight of the verdict settle in the room. "Richard Sterling," the judge said, "please stand." Sterling tried to stand, but his legs were shaking so badly he had to lean on the table. "In my 30 years on the bench," Judge Keller began, his voice booming with authority, "I have seen murderers, drug dealers, and thieves, but I have rarely seen a man with such a profound lack of soul. You were given every advantage in life, education, wealth, opportunity, and you used it to prey on the weak." The judge picked up a piece of paper, the sentencing sheet. "You threw water on a boy because you thought he was beneath you. That boy, Mr. Vance, sitting right there, has more integrity in his little finger than you have in your entire offshore portfolio. He saved the pensions of 40,000 people. You tried to destroy them." Sterling wiped sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. "Mr. Sterling, you played a game of high stakes thinking you were the house. But the house doesn't always win. Justice wins. For the crimes of defrauding the American public and for the sheer malice displayed in your actions, I am sentencing you to 150 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole." "No," Sterling screamed, the reality finally shattering his composure. He lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the defense table. "You can't do this. I'm Richard. Sterling, I can pay. I have money hidden. I can make a deal." "Bailiffs," Judge Keller said calmly. "Take him away." "Elijah!" Sterling shrieked, turning his wild eyes toward the front row as 2 large marshals grabbed him by the arms. "Elijah, tell them I can help you. I can make you rich. Don't let them put me in a cage." Elijah stood up slowly. He looked at the man who had tried to humiliate him. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked pitying. "You're already poor, Richard," Elijah said, his voice quiet, but carrying clearly in the stunned courtroom. "You just have money." The marshals dragged Sterling out the side door, his screams echoing in the hallway until the heavy steel door slammed shut, sealing his fate forever. The courtroom erupted. Cheers, tears, and hugs. Sheila Vance buried her face in her son's shoulder and wept not from sadness, but from relief. The monster who had stolen her future was gone. An hour later, Elijah and Sheila walked down the massive stone steps of the courthouse. The afternoon sun was blinding, a sharp contrast to the gloom of the trial. The press was waiting behind the barricades, a sea of microphones and cameras. "Elijah, Elijah, over here. How does it feel to take down a billionaire? What are you going to do now?" Elijah stopped at the bottom of the steps. He adjusted the vintage headphones around his neck, the same ones Sterling had told him to turn down. He stepped up to a cluster of microphones. "Justice was served today," Elijah said, his voice steady. "But this wasn't about me. It was about the people who work double shifts to put food on the table, only to have guys like Sterling steal it from a computer screen. He thought he was untouchable because he flew first class. He forgot that the plane doesn't fly without the crew. We're the crew." He put his arm around his mother. "And now we're going home." He tried to move toward the waiting car, but a black sedan pulled up to the curb, blocking their path. The rear window rolled down. It was the silver-haired man from the tarmac, Director Alan Vance, Elijah's grandfather. The crowd went silent, sensing the power radiating from the vehicle. Alan stepped out, flanked by two men in suits. He didn't look at the press. He looked only at Elijah and Sheila. "Hello, Sheila," Alan said softly. Sheila stiffened, clutching Elijah's arm. "Alan, you're about 18 years too late." "I know," Alan said, a flicker of pain in his eyes. "I can't change the past. My son, your husband, he was a stubborn man, and so was I. But I watched today. You raised him well. He's better than us." Alan turned to Elijah and extended a thick manila envelope. "The SEC whistleblower program," Alan said formally. "By law, the whistleblower is entitled to 10 to 30% of the sanctions collected. Since the asset seizure was over $4 billion, the cap is instituted." He pressed the envelope into Elijah's hand. "That is a certified check for $40 million. It's tax-free. It's yours." The reporters gasped. Cameras flashed wildly. Elijah looked at the envelope. It was light, but it felt heavy with history. He turned to his mother and placed it in her hands. "Buy the house, Mum," he whispered, smiling. "Buy the whole block. You're never scrubbing a floor again." Sheila looked at the check tears streaming down her face again. But Elijah turned back to his grandfather. "Is that it?" Elijah asked. "No," Alan said. He pulled a black keycard from his pocket. It bore the insignia of the NSA. "This is a Level 5 clearance badge, along with a full scholarship to MIT. I want you to come work for me, Elijah. You have a gift. The NSA needs you. We catch monsters like Sterling before they get on the plane." Elijah looked at the black card. It was the ultimate golden ticket. Power, prestige, protection. It was the path his grandfather had walked. He looked at the card, then he looked at his mother, and finally he looked at the headphones around his neck. "I'll take the scholarship," Elijah said respectfully. "I want to learn everything I can, but I can't take the badge." Alan raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Why?" "It's the highest honor in the field." "Because," Elijah said, "the NSA works in the dark. You guys watched Sterling for years and did nothing because he was connected. You needed a kid to throw a wrench in the gears to finally act." Elijah stepped back, a confident smile spreading across his face. "I don't want to work in the dark, grandfather. I'm starting my own firm, Vance Security. We're going to work for the public. We're going to protect the teachers and the janitors from the next Richard Sterling. I'm going to be the guy they call when the system fails." Alan stared at his grandson for a long moment. Then slowly, a smile cracked his stoic face. He nodded. "You really are your father's son," Alan said. "Stubborn and brilliant. Good luck, Elijah." Alan got back into the sedan. As it drove away, Elijah felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He wasn't the victim anymore. He wasn't even just the whistleblower. He was the architect of his own future. "Come on, Mom," Elijah said, opening the door to their taxi. "Let's go get some dinner." somewhere expensive, and I'm ordering the sparkling water. Deep in the bowels of a concrete fortress in Colorado, Richard Sterling sat on the edge of a hard metal cot. His cell was 6 feet by 8 feet. There were no leather seats. There was no Wi-Fi. A guard walked by and slid a plastic tray through the slot in the door. "Dinner," the guard grunted. Sterling looked at the tray. It was a tasteless loaf of processed meat and a small plastic cup of lukewarm tap water. Sterling picked up the cup. His hands were shaking. He stared at the water, seeing his own reflection in the rippling surface. He remembered the ice cubes. He remembered the feeling of power as he threw it. He took a sip. It tasted like rust and regret. He realized then, in the silence of his cage, that he would have 150 years to think about that one glass of water. It was the most expensive drink in history, and he had paid for it with his life. And that is the story of how one act of arrogance brought down an empire. It's a reminder that no matter how much money you have, character is the only currency that matters in the end. Richard Sterling thought he could wash away Elijah's dignity with a glass of water, but all he did was wash away his own freedom. What did you think of Elijah's decision at the end? Should he have joined the NSA, or was starting his own firm the right move? And let's be honest, seeing Sterling get 150 years was pure satisfaction, right? If you enjoyed this story of massive karma and high-stakes justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. We release new dramas every week. Share this video with someone who needs to see a bully get exactly what they deserve. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.